Hey everyone, it's Justine and welcome to a new collab video for this month in April. Today I'm looking at fixing common card mistakes or common card mistakes that you could make. This video is supposed to be slightly comical and very informative. Now I'm collaborating today with Ardith, who's going over some other common card mistakes. She's a fabulous video creator, so be sure to go check out her channel, subscribe, and leave her a comment saying that I sent you over. So let's get diving right into it. Let's talk about the wrong ink type. You have to know your ink properties when stamping. So I would say that black ink, I have about 10 different types of black ink pads. I know it sounds excessive, but it's because it depends on the type of surface that I'm stamping on. So in this video here, I'm stamping on some glossy cardstock, some Yupo paper for an alcohol ink background. And if I were to stamp with a dye ink, when I go to touch it, it will smudge and bleed. It probably doesn't matter how long you leave it to dry, it's still going to act like this because it's stamping an ink that's meant to be stamped on paper onto a non-porous surface, so there's nowhere for it to absorb. Now I have a great video that goes through all the different types of black ink and what to use for which situation. But in this case, for a glossy paper, I recommend this Stazon ink. You could get Stazon in a regular formula or in a pigment formula like I'm using. Both will work just fine. Just know that the pigment formula, it will take about 30 seconds to dry rather than drying being immediate. But this is how you can stamp on your alcohol inked background. The video that I have linked below as well as in the information card above in the top right corner will go into all the different things and types you need for ink for watercoloring, for Copic coloring, for all those different things because they're all different. You'll see when I leave this now to dry after stamping with the Stazon, I have absolutely no issues with it smudging or coming off on my cloth. The next one is an ink smudge. Now, I don't know how many times I have gone to complete a card, I go to touch my cardstock, and I get a fingerprint on my card. Now, I'm going to introduce you to this lovely tool called a sandpaper eraser. They retail for about $2 to $3, nothing super crazy, and it's one of the best things I've ever had in my craft room. I apologize for the slight shake of the camera while I'm erasing. Now, I find you need a little bit of patience, and I also find it helps if I twist and turn my cardstock just to make sure I get into all the fibers. Now, if you get a super dark smudge on your cardstock, this eraser will help make it less noticeable, but it probably won't take it off. But the smudge I just had, for example, it's barely noticeable when I'm all finished. Now, what is important is that you don't scratch too hard because as sandpaper is, it will eventually wear off on your paper. But this is definitely a really great way to get some of those ink smudges off. If you can't get it off with the ink smudges, then I recommend something called creative placement, meaning you stick something over top like a sequin or a nouveau drop or your sentiment so that you don't notice and you can distract from your little mark. That way you don't have to go and ruin your card or toss it in the garbage. The next one is crooked paper. I believe Ardith is showing you her own solution, but my solution for this one is dental floss. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to add some deluxe adhesive all over the back of my cardstock. I'm going to stick it onto a card base and let it fuse to the paper and dry. And I purposely put this crooked on my card base. Now, in order to take this off, I'm going to just give it a second to dramatize, I guess you could say, a real life situation. But you're going to grab a piece of dental floss and then you're going to just simply pull down the dental floss through the cardstock and it will lift up all that glue and your panel is most likely going to be able to be salvaged in the end. It may take a little bit of working through, but what I do is I hold my thumbs at the base of the cardstock and just kind of wiggle my way down like I would if I were flossing my own teeth, and then eventually it will come loose, lift off all of that adhesive, and be good to go. Then you're totally free to go ahead and reapply your glue and glue it on there straight. So I hope that was maybe something new that you've learned. I can't remember for the life of me where I saw someone do this, but I thought, wow, isn't that an amazing trick? Now, keeping on the adhesive train, what happens when you have excessive glue? My solution is an adhesive remover. So a lot of the times I find I get this most often when I'm gluing intricate sentiments, but I'm going to do it on a flower here. So I'm just going to glue this down. This is a leftover flower from one of my videos from the other day, and I purposely added too much glue so that it seeped out of the edge. Now, if I were to just grab a cloth or my finger and just wipe this off, it's usually fine to the naked eye, but what happens a lot of the times is when you go to put it into your card stash for later, or you go to transfer it to an envelope, it ends up getting smudges from fingers, from dust, or whatever ends up getting stuck to it. Or you risk your envelope getting stuck to it when the person's pulling it out. So an adhesive remover is simply almost like a rubber eraser in a way that will then take this off without really leaving any sort of residue from the eraser itself. I love using this. They retail for about $2, and I have no idea why it took me so long to invest in one of these, but I definitely use it all the time. It's also perfect for getting rid of removable adhesive as well. Messy embossing is something that plagues everyone, especially on black cardstock. So why it happens is your paper could be staticky and have an electric charge. In a way, static charge? I don't know. I'm not really a science person. Also, the oils of your fingers, when you touch your cardstock, if they're a little bit on the greasier side, then it collects embossing powder and it can stick in places we don't want it to stick. So I'm grabbing my extremely dirty Versamark ink pad, and I'm going to be inking up my first stamp and stamping it down. Now you can see that I have put my fingers all over it and I haven't prepped my surface at all. I just stamped it down. You can see the stamp is on there, and I'm going to add embossing powder and you'll see what happens. So obviously with the oils from my fingers and also the general static that's on the paper, I'm going to have all this powder on there that's excessive, and even when I tap the back, I don't have any option but to really put that on there. And I'm going to go through a couple of techniques here to show you what ends up happening when you prep the surface properly. So the first thing that you can do is, if you don't own an embossing bag, you can stamp and try and keep your fingers kind of out of the way when it comes to that. I'm using this beautiful glittery gold embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, by the way, that I just got in the mail, and I absolutely love it. And what you can do is you can grab a dry paintbrush and you can just go quickly along your sentiment and just brush off any sort of excess powder. Now this works for the most part, but it really gets difficult when you get little pieces of powder stuck between words or between letters because it's so tiny. Now I grabbed an embossing bag, I added powder on top. This is going to make the static go away and block any oils from my fingers. I'm going to put the embossing powder on and heat it up, and you'll also notice that there is absolutely no excess embossing powder when I had prepped the surface with the embossing bag. But you're probably wondering, now it looks all cloudy and the black doesn't look nice. Just grab a cloth, I use a microfiber cloth, and just go across the cardstock and it will go back to its regular color. So that's how you can get perfect embossing every time, even on black cardstock. If you do happen to get one little piece or two, you can also grab that sandpaper eraser once again and give it a quick little rub and it should come right off. The next one are stamping mistakes. So typical stamping mistakes, and we've all been here. Especially it seems to happen when we're all done our card and we're adding that final sentiment. One thing that can happen is you stamp it crooked. Obviously I'm exaggerating a bit here, but it happens. The other thing, you drop your block. Happens all of the time, at least to me. Or you didn't get enough ink maybe on your stamp, or maybe you had a slight shift when you were stamping and then you get a little bit of a shadow underneath. That was a little hard for the camera to pick up here. And then lastly, of course, as I said, not having enough ink on your stamp. Now the solution for this one is not necessarily, for me, a solution that you can fix your card. As I said, creative placement will do. Just cut out a new sentiment and glue it on top, but rather use the MISTI stamping tool. Every time you stamp with this, you're going to get a great impression because you can stamp over and over again in the same spot as long as your cardstock is flushed to the corner of your MISTI stamping tool. You can also make sure that it's straight by lining up your stamp using the grid lines on the lid. This has been my absolute best investment. I know a lot of people say that it's a little on the pricey side, but in my opinion, it's the cost of about 3 to 4 stamp sets, depending on the size you buy, and I use this every single time I craft, whereas my stamp sets, I can't say the same thing. Not to mention the amount of money it saved me in cardstock. So I hope you found some of these little tips and tricks amusing, but as well as informative for finding some solutions when you're card making. Be sure to check out Ardith's video. I have the link below in the video description, and see what other card making tips that she has in store for you over on her channel. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you in a couple of days for another video. Bye for now.